Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Kevin. Kevin, can you please share a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. So my name's Kevin Oakes. I'm the CEO, co-founder of the Institute for Corporate Productivity. We shorten that to I4cp. We are an HR research firm, so we do more human capital research than just about anybody on the planet, always with a business lens of what are high-performing organizations doing differently with their people practices versus low-performing organizations.
So, what are high-performing organizations doing around generative AI? What have you found?
Yeah, we've studied this quite a bit and have done longitudinal work
Mhm,
around Gen AI because it is moving very fast, as you know, Gleb. And what our latest study, which is called Workforce Readiness in the Era of AI,
mhm,
found is there's different maturity levels of organizations when
mhm,
it comes to Gen AI. The majority of organizations are in simple research mode or
mhm,
experimentation mode when it comes to Gen AI. There's a small percentage of companies that are actively ignoring
mhm,
or banning AI within their
mhm,
organization, but those are small percentages. At the top end, there's 11% of organizations that have operationalized Gen AI,
mhm,
meaning it's now being actively used throughout the enterprise
mhm,
for both efficiency and external effectiveness, from a product
mhm,
perspective, et cetera. What we found with those organizations that have really embraced Gen AI and are
mhm,
operationalizing it, they are the highest performing organizations.
mhm,
So, by our index, which is based off of revenue growth, profitability,
mhm,
market share, et cetera, those companies that are on the upward scale on the maturity side are the
mhm,
high performing organizations. Now, you can look at
mhm,
that two ways, in my opinion. Probably the most logical way is that the strong are getting stronger, right? These were
mhm,
already good companies and they have really embraced Gen AI and they're getting even
mhm,
stronger because of it. But I do think that there's an aspect of their embracing of Gen AI has moved them up that, market
mhm,
index to become high performing organizations
mhm,
as well. Regardless, I think that the message that we've been giving to companies is you should be working towards that
mhm,
upper, right-hand side of the quadrant be on the upper level of the maturity side when it comes to Gen AI.
mhm. Now, of course, the upper level quadrant companies that have now matured used to be in the experimental stage,
Right.
and that's kind of where they have progressed to now. So tell me a little bit about what you typically observe about the stages of generative AI adoption for companies. Take me through
Yep.
the stages that you've seen.
So a big reason why companies make that move is because of training.
Hmm.
And in some ways it seems basic, but it's amazing to us how few companies are training their workforce across the
Mm,
board on Gen AI. Most companies have provided training only to a small percentage of the workforce.
mhm,
Um, when it comes to training, we find that those top companies
mhm,
don't ignore the leadership when they conduct this training, and it's odd, but that's a group that often does get ignored.
mhm,
They first focus there, and they make sure
mhm,
not only CEO and senior leaders
mhm,
on down understand Gen AI, but that they're using it actively.
mhm,
And when they do that, they then become promoters of Gen AI
mhm,
throughout the organization. And I think that's a really sound place to start for a lot of
mhm,
organizations is start with your leadership and then provide training enterprise-wide, upskilling, to the
mhm,
organization. Don't just segment certain, populations of the
mhm,
organization. Make sure that you can provide it enterprise-wide. Once you do that, you do get more widespread adoption.
mhm,
The other key that we found to adoption is um, resist going into divisions, departments, or job roles and telling those people what should be automated.
mhm,
Instead, enlist the help of employees to
mhm,
provide insight into what they believe should be automated
mhm,
about their role. Employees know better than anybody,
Mm,
what's rote and what is not a good use of their skills,
mhm,
and what potentially could be turned over to Gen AI. But at the same time, when you do that, you get them bought into the process, right? Now
mhm,
that they're contributing, so it's a co-creation mentality
mm,
in the culture as opposed to being told or being somebody else just making that decision for
mm,
them. Um, so, those are just some things off the top of my head,
mhm,
Gleb, that I can think, really work within those high-performing
mm.
organizations.
So, Kevin, tell me a little bit more about this training that you've seen. There are a number of ways of training people, of course, and there are some workshops, there's micro learning, there's peer mentoring, lots of ways of training folks. You can have external people who do training, you can have your IT people doing training. What are the best approaches to training that you've seen?
Um, you know, I I think that there are several ways you can train work, and I come from a training background and
Hmm.
was very early in the e-learning game. And I think there's asynchronous courses that can be very
Hmm.
effective in helping bring people up to speed on
Hmm.
topics, within Gen AI. I think you can also do instructor-led training,
Hmm.
and a blended approach in between the two.
Hmm.
One thing that we've seen very effective in organizations in general when it comes to critical training is to also get the leaders involved. This is an old
Hmm.
Jack Welch GE trick, but they often have leaders teaching courses,
Hmm.
which helps those leaders become much more adept, but
Hmm.
also gives more importance, to
Hmm.
the topic itself. Now, the skills that we've seen focused on for organizations are, they sort of start with the basics. They start with
Hmm.
data security and responsible use and just AI ethics and basic Gen AI literacy. But they work their way up to how they can integrate AI into
Hmm.
work and what are some use case examples of that. They look at critically evaluating outputs of Gen AI.
Hmm.
They look at more, from a regulation standpoint, they're looking at,
Hmm.
how is AI regulated? So that you can get nuanced as you get
Hmm.
more involved in AI overall, but starting with the basics
Hmm.
is the first step.
That makes sense. Now, let's talk about the automation part, giving it to employees. A lot of employees are skeptical, hesitant, worried around generative AI displacing them, replacing their jobs, changing what they do, making their previously valued skills not so valuable. So you say to give opportunities to employees to decide what parts of their job to automate, but that seems to be a little bit of a contradiction for folks who are skeptical and hesitant. How do you square that circle?
I think when you involve the employees in those decisions, the important thing to emphasize is that you're
Hmm.
not looking to replace them. You're looking to free up their time to focus on more
Hmm.
strategic things. And we've got some great examples of companies that have done that,
Hmm.
where they've freed up time for hundreds
Hmm.
of employees to move into other areas of the
Hmm.
company. Um, I don't like with any new technology, you're not going to get around the fact that, of course, the technology is going to replace jobs. It's already
Hmm.
happened.
Yeah.
BLS is tracking that on a monthly basis. We will see, complete functions replaced by Gen
Hmm.
AI, that's for sure. But, similar to any technology innovation, we adapt. And I think
Hmm.
what organizations are doing is adapting, and they're figuring
Hmm.
out where they can apply that human power, that brain power, into other roles that have been
Hmm.
ignored. One of the more surprising findings that we found, Gleb, though, as we looked at this, is the more training people did receive and the more
Hmm.
adept they became at Gen AI, the more fearful they became actually that their
Hmm.
job might be replaced. And it's pretty simple to see why that they
Hmm.
they begin to really understand the power of
Hmm.
this technology that they're using. It's ignorance is bliss with some of the other people. They just don't know enough to realize that
Hmm.
jobs could be replaced. But I think as a species, we've always adapted. We had some of these same fears when the internet first got launched and used by
Hmm.
organizations. I can remember all the same fears and news articles around that, right? And over time, that tends to dissipate, and we get smart about how to leverage technology to our benefit.
Now, you of course work with leaders, HR leaders, and one of the difficult things to do about this topic is communicating effectively around these fears. So one strategy that I've seen, and when I work with companies in generative AI adoption, I do see it being somewhat effective, is telling employees that, hey, you're not going to be replaced by generative AI. If you're going to be replaced, you're going to be replaced by somebody using generative AI more effectively than you. And that motivates some people to get with the program. And I'm curious what you've seen around effective messaging. What kind of messaging have you seen effective? What does your research show? What do you see as the right approach?
I don't think there's a silver bullet.
Hmm.
Even the quote you just said is widely used, but it's more of a threat,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yes.
a threat that, hey, you better start using Gen AI or you're going to get replaced by somebody smarter than you. I think the key here is just discussion,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
transparency. I think the more open your communication is with employees about
Hmm.
what this could do, the better. Now, one of the
Hmm.
issues that I see in a lot of organizations is they just have not communicated a strategy around Gen AI
Hmm.
inside the company. So it's a big mystery to a lot of employees. Like, how are
Hmm.
we planning on using this?
Hmm.
What are we planning on doing, from a Gen AI standpoint? And the more that management can lay out that strategy,
Hmm.
and then down at the department manager level, they describe how your
Hmm.
role fits into that strategy, the better, everybody's going to be.
Hmm.
It's like any change management process. The more aligned you are with that strategy and the more understanding you are of how that alignment
Hmm.
affects the strategy, the better you're off people will be in the long run.
Now, generative AI is different than some other change technology developments and change management processes around them, is that it has a lot more risks with data privacy, security, hallucinations, bias. How do you have a effective approach to risk management, especially around employees who are concerned about the risks and the ethics of generative AI?
I think you've got to make sure that that's part of that basic training that we talked about first and
Mm.
foremost. You've got to be very clear with
Hmm.
employees how they are to use Gen AI and what the governance rules are around it.
Hmm.
I think organizations have gotten a lot smarter about this over the
Hmm.
last year or two. Uh, we're seeing, a lot of, walled off applications and companies really understanding how they use their own large language model to fuel what they're trying to do. Um, yeah, it carries risk.
Hmm.
It, you know, I again, I just kind of harken back to what we always have gone through.
Hmm.
The advent of the internet, the advent of smartphones, go on and on and on. All of
Hmm.
these carried security risks, right? And we got smart about those risks. We developed
Hmm.
tools to help us with those risks. That's all happening today as well. It just seems like anytime there's something
Hmm.
brand new, we get more fearful. Now, this is a very, very powerful tool. Don't get me wrong. I recognize the power that Gen AI it brings, much more so than some of those other
Hmm.
things I just cited. So I do think that the training is pretty critical here.
Hmm.
But the smart companies are managing through that, and what they're really doing is
Hmm.
figuring out how to use this as an opportunity to get more market share, to be
Hmm.
more competitive. They're not sitting back fearful. Instead, they're
Hmm.
embracing it and moving forward.
Now, Kevin, you do a great deal of research. That's your area of expertise. So you know a lot about metrics. So when we talk about what kind of metrics companies are using around generative AI, what kind of metrics should they be using for generative AI adoption integration? What do you see as what the best companies are doing? Where should companies be moving toward?
Yeah, I mean, we're even doing this in our own company, but we're tracking who's using Gen AI, how often they're accessing it. I think there's power in familiarity, and there's a lot
Mhm.
of studies that have shown that the more you use it, the more adept you are over time,
Mhm.
and recognize that how to leverage it and how not to leverage it,
Mhm.
I guess. So some of those usage metrics I think can be very important for companies. I think you want to track, what is happening from a productivity standpoint when we've
Mhm.
put Gen AI in certain departments or divisions? How has that improved productivity?
Mhm.
How has it improved the well-being of the workforce as well? There's an
Mhm.
aspect of that. If you can free up some of that time, then, especially those rote tasks, my mental health will probably improve, probably my
Yeah.
physical health as well. So I think, there's a lot of the similarities between culture measurements, frankly, when you
Mhm.
look at Gen AI that I would advocate for people to look at. And we've written articles on
Mhm.
how do you measure culture and, what are the
Mhm.
different indexes you should be looking at. And I think some of those
Mhm.
same criteria apply here.
Now, as we finish up, when you're thinking about the future of generative AI, it's getting more and more agentic. There are more and more tasks that will be replaced in the next
Right.
couple of years. Where do you see it going, and how do you see companies shifting and changing, especially the more higher performing companies, as generative AI becomes more and more capable?
Yeah, I said this to an audience yesterday. If you don't know what agentic AI is, a year from now, you better, because that's all we're going to be talking
Hmm.
about, right? And
Yeah.
and it's kind of a dumb name in my opinion, but AI agents are going to be very prolific,
Hmm.
performing many tasks autonomously on behalf of organizations. And my counsel has been to these companies, try to figure out where you can apply agents in general.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of very menial tasks that, just from a pure efficiency standpoint, we're going to be able to improve productivity because you've applied agents, to those tasks. Um, a year from now, we'll be talking about all the ethical issues around agents, I'm sure, and
Hmm.
have we created monsters, inside our own organizations, and we'll be wrestling with that. But I think becoming familiar with AI agents is step number one for many organizations. And we are right at the beginning of this. Most companies don't have a whole lot of agents that they've deployed yet.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise. That was very helpful.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show. And if you have any questions, email me at gleb, Gleb, at disasteravoidanceexperts.com.